Hi everyone, it's me, Italian Gamer Joe, and today I will be giving you part 2 of my adventure game tutorial. If you haven't done so already, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, just so you can get the latest updates and help me help you when it comes to questions, features, and more. So the topics we will be discussing in today's video include setting up dynamic cursor types. This is extremely important if you want to have the player get feedback if they are going to switch areas or if they want to examine something. So that's going to be really some fun small changes we're making. And then we also have some brand new features that we're going to introduce today, including the dialogue functionality. Environments are great if you can move through them, but we also want a character to describe what they see in their environment and how it makes them feel. So we're going to include that today. We're also going to talk about JSON files, which is where we'll be keeping all of our dialogue and all of that information, and then as well as using AJAX requests to have Construct request information from files and then bring it back to us. And then there's going to be a bunch of other little things that I'll introduce as well that's not listed here, but just stay tuned and let's dive right in. And as always, I love to do a little demo to show you what we're going to be doing today before we actually get started. So as you can see from the last time we talked, we had this like really cool cursor situation. Some new cool things that I added though are a dialogue screen. So now you have a dynamic cursor that displays yellow for examining points of interest, and then we also have a dialogue layer that comes up, and then it basically shows whoever is in this world their thoughts and what they want to do. So for example, the player wants to jump in the pool. So it's just a really cool feature, and now it just adds a little bit of interactiveness to our environments. So the first feature that I want to talk about is the dynamic cursor. How does the player know the difference between if they're going to be examining an area versus if they want to switch areas? So knowing the difference between examining an area versus moving to another area is something that needs to be done on the user interface. And in this case, I am having it done through the cursor action text, which is what you see here. The cursor action text is located, but I also have it through the cursor as well. So if we go ahead and we access our cursor, I'm going to show you some new updates that I made. So we do have the original default animation, which plays as a sort of just default cursor. The player hasn't interacted with anything yet. It's just the default cursor. We also have the action cursor, which is for movement. This one's also something we discussed earlier. And then we also have the question cursor. I did change the question mark so that it looks a little bit more vibrant when the player gets something that they want to examine. And then finally, we have dialogue continue. This is an important cursor for indicating where the player should be clicking next when it comes to reading that dialogue. So the two new cursors that I want to make sure that we have is the question and the dialogue. This question existed before, but I just made it a little bit more vibrant. And then we have the dialogue continue, which I'm indicating as a greater than symbol, but it can also just be a right arrow. It's kind of what I'm doing there. I suppose I could do like something like this, but I'm just going to keep it as the greater than symbol for now. So that's the important part. I want to make sure my cursor kind of looks the part. The next part that we're going to do though, after we have this little situation with the cursor or have these animations with the cursor, is we need to look at our hotspots. So as you can see here, I basically have some really cool instance variables for my hotspot. So just to recap, an instance variable is a property that gets assigned to an object, a game object. Game objects start off with not really many instance variables at all, if any. But there are built-in ones like position, size, angle, opacity, so on and so forth. But you can also define your own instance variables in Construct. So that's what we're doing here. In our previous video, we have some instance variables like the layout, which is where the player should go to next. And then we also have the cursor action text for like what should display on the screen. And then now we have a new one that I want to work on, which is the cursor type. So if you are following along with me, what I think you should do is go to instance variables and then create this cursor type instance variable. Instance variables have no spaces in them, so make sure that you camel case like I'm doing it. Camel casing basically means uppercase. So if you can't put spaces in between your words, make sure to just do like finish the word and then without spaces put a capital letter for the next one and just do cursor type. The type of the variable is going to be a string. There's something I haven't really brought up before, and it's this idea of data types. So when it comes to making variables, there's multiple different types of data types that you can declare. So there's a Boolean, which is either true or false. There's a number, which can just be any, decimal, whole number, negative number, so on and so forth. And then we have strings, which are just strings of text that are denoted typically by double quotes or single quotes, but sometimes in this instance you don't have to put the double quotes, but construct can just read it naturally. But these are what data types are. But let's go back to the cursor type, and this is how you should declare it: cursor type. And then the description I put as move action other. I'm actually going to get rid of this, and we're going to call this, for the comment, I'm going to put SPR cursor dot animation. So that's a little comment to let you know that the animation that it should be is one of these. It should either be default, action, question, or dialogue continue. So that's what our cursor type is going to be. The next instance variable that I'd like for you to add, which is important, is something called extra action. So we have an action, which is our typical action that we're going to use for layouts. For example, the action for this hotspot is, well, we actually have it as a layout, so this is a little bit different. But when we start creating our examine, we're going to do an action, but then we also need to pass in an additional parameter. So I'm doing extra action examine bush. This is important. I think it's because if you have actions that have like sub actions, then this is a really easy way to do situations like this that don't overwhelm your code or make you have to write like any string functions or anything to like divide up what your actions should be. So in my opinion, create an instance variable right now and just call it extra action, and then make it a string. And then for the description, write whatever you want. I just put used for parameterized actions. So now that we have our hotspots laid out, the next part is going to be programming this. When it comes to our event sheets, this is just a really quick recap. The layout we are in is called front, which is the front of the house. Another example of a layout would be the pool, or the side of the house, or the stairway. And as you can see here, each layout has its own animation image. It also has the layers, like the GUI layer, the cursor layer, and the front. For the front of the house, we have the dialogue layer, which I will be talking about briefly or shortly. But when it comes to layouts in Construct, layouts are equivalent to like, scenes in Unity. Basically, it's this idea of, a level or like a scene. And sometimes you'll hear me say scene and layout interchangeably, but a layout is basically like a game level. And just to recap again, the project settings that we have, if you click anywhere outside of that, if you're not selecting anything, you can go to the editor here and you'll see project properties. Our project's viewport size is 1280 by 720, which is essentially HD. It's I know we have like 1920 by 1080, which is also HD, but we also have 4K if you wanted to do that. But when it comes to our viewport size, we're going to do 1280 by 720. And the way you know what the viewport size is through these dashed lines. So anything that's within the dashed lines is considered the viewport. So it goes down and then goes across. And the way that screens calculate their sizes when it comes to stuff like this is as you start on the top left, which is 0, 0. I'm trying to move my mouse as close as I can to 0, 0, and then you can see the mouse values right here. So the top left corner would be like 0, 0, which my mouse is at right now, and then the bottom of the viewport, which would be down here, which would be the 1280 by 720, which my mouse is on it right now. So when it comes to coordinates on this, on a layout, for example, the position of this hotspot is in position 457, 450. And what that means is you're going 457 pixels to the left, and then to the right, and then you're going 450 pixels down. So the object starts right here, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. 350, 370. Wait a minute. Or is it, sorry, I'm double checking actually. 457, 450. Oh, my bad. Okay, it actually starts on the midpoint of the object for construct. So it's actually the midpoint. And I wonder, I'm not 100% sure, but part of me wonders if it's the way the sprite is being drawn, but it's actually the midpoint. So my mistake. But so the way it works is that it's going 457 pixels to the left, and then it's going 450 down, and then it's bringing you to that like midpoint of that sprite. So that's kind of what positioning means in construct. But now that we know the difference, now that we know what a layout is, now I want to talk about event sheets again. So event sheets are the code behind when it comes to the layout. So if you go back to the layout, you'll see a little inspector property here called event sheet. This is how you know what event sheet the layout is using. And I can actually change it, but I'm not going to. I'm going to just keep it as front. And then if we right click and go to edit event sheet, it'll take us directly to the front event sheet. So ideally every layout should have an event sheet, but there are situations where you might have independent event sheets that can stand on their own, and then as long as they are included in the layouts event sheet, you can access them anytime. So for example, we are currently inside of the front event sheet, and there's a include up here, which include means grab the code from another event sheet and include it in my existing layout. So if I were to double click this event sheet, you can see that I have the input manager, that code that's currently being displayed. But the front event sheet currently has nothing. And the reason why it has nothing is because the idea is you want your event sheets like front, pool, side, stairway to be specific code should be in here that is only related to this area, or to this front, layout. Any code that can be shared across layouts should be in an event sheet on its own. That way you're writing less code and it's just more convenient. So going back to the main topic at hand, how do we get the cursor to display the correct animation? So let's go ahead for a second and jump back to the front of the house, and we are going to look at our hotspot. So the instance variable that we have for the hotspots when it comes to the cursor type is right here. And when it comes to our type of hotspot, we want to make sure we know the distinction. So for this hotspot, we are going to move from the front of the house to the pool. So the cursor type should be action. And where is that coming from? That's coming from the cursor's animation that we just declared here, action. If we're going to examine something, we're going to do question, which, where did we get that from? We got that from question right here. So make sure that those line up. Now let's go to the code behind, which is the input manager. The spot that I want to focus on is the hotspot logic right here. I did make some changes, so I will try to explain this as detailed as I can. So the idea is, if the cursor is overlapping a hotspot, what we want to do is we want to set the animation of that cursor to spr_hotspot, which is the name of our object, dot cursor type. So what we're doing is we're calling the object, and then we're doing dot to access the instance variables, and then this is the name of our instance variable cursor type, which it's a little bit faded, but you can see it here, cursor type. So again, we're calling the sprite hotspot. Dot allows us to access properties, and then we are calling our instance variable called cursor type. The from beginning and current frame, this is if you have like animated cursors, but we'll just do from the beginning. Our cursor is not even animated, so that doesn't really matter right now. But we're gonna go ahead and click done. So just to like recap, this line of code is just saying if the cursor is overlapping the hotspot, then we're going to set the animation of the cursor to the cursor type, which is the which again goes back to these animations. The next thing we want to do is we want to have the cursor action text. This is a sub event that happens, by the way. So if this condition is met, then it's going to run the code here, and then it's going to run any additional lines of code below it. So this is a as long as it fits the criteria. So what we're doing here is we are setting the cursor action texts dynamic. We are setting the dynamic texts cursor action text to the hotspot's cursor action text, which if we go back to front, we are setting that here. So if you were listening from my previous video and you're watching now, I originally had this code below this, and then what I ended up doing was I wanted to refactor and clean my code a little bit, so I decided to move it here. Refactoring code basically means looking at your existing code and cleaning things up a bit or changing things. So this is what happens if the cursor overlaps with a hotspot. We're going to do these things. Now, if this doesn't work, if the cursor leaves the hotspot, if the cursor ends up going somewhere else, now we have an else condition. And our else condition is if the cursor is not overlapping the hotspot, then we're going to set the animation back to default. And default is the name of our animation here. So it goes into the hotspot, we're going to declare it, we're going to set it to whatever the cursor type we set was, otherwise make it default. And then the way to determine like if it's overlapping or not, the way that you like set that up is if you right click and you do invert. So I just clicked invert, so right now it's checking if it's overlapping, but we don't want to do that, so we're going to do invert. Invert means the opposite of. So this is if we are overlapping, and this is if we are not overlapping. And what we want to do then is we want to set the cursor action text, the dynamic text that we declared. I want to set that to nothing, because if the cursor is nowhere to be found on a hotspot, then we want to set that, we want to reset it. So that is what we did there, and that is the code for the cursor. So let's go ahead and demo that really quickly. And as you can see here, my cursor is defaulting to the default animation. I have it over examine, and as you can see here, the examine is working as well as the dialog. If I move it away, it defaults back to nothing. And then I have the go to pool, which has the red cursor. So it looks like it's working exactly how we expected. So the next feature that we are going to talk about is the dialogue. When it comes to adventure games, the dialogue is important because it helps the player understand what's going on in their environment, and if the player is assuming the role of a character, then this helps us get into the thoughts of the character. So for example, we clicked on the bush and it says, "This home has some very interesting scenery, including some bushes. I think they look very pretty." So as you can see, we examined the bush, and then a special little dialogue layer popped up, allowing us to see what the character in the game is thinking. If we go to the pool and then we interact, which I have to change the cursor, by the way, that is a bug. But if we go to examine pool, it'll say that's something new. "The pool looks so relaxing on this hot summer day. All I want to do right now is jump in the pool. I should change into my swimwear." So as you can see here, I found another bug. We have to change the cursor a little bit. It looks like it's so maybe in the comments, if you have ideas, we can focus on that, but I'll get those bugs shortly. But that's kind of what we want to do, though. We want to basically we want to have the player click on a hotspot and then create some dialogue. So how do we do that? Well, we do need to change some things that already exist. The first thing we want to do is we want to set up the hotspot distinction between a move hotspot and an examine hotspot. The way that we do this right now is through some of our instance variables. So if you want to move from one location to another, we set the layout instance variable to pool, which is basically the name of the layout. So what I'm doing is just copying and pasting the layout, putting it here. And just to recap, the way that works is we have our layout itself has an event sheet which calls input manager. To recap, input manager means what are the how we handle inputs in our game, so mouse, keyboard, and so on and so forth. So our logic for the hotspots is in this group, and we have a mouse click event right here that's saying on the left button click on the hotspot. We're going to call a function called click hotspot, and the parameters are action and layout. Extra action did get added, but I will explain that shortly. Don't worry about this for now. But those were the two original parameters. If we go to our functions now, which is an independent event sheet, and don't forget that functions are global. This event sheet is global. Functions can be pulled from can be put anywhere, but what we want to do to create some effective code is keep our functions in one place. That way it's just easier to remember where our functions are. So when we do click hotspot, what's happening is we're passing in 3 parameters, which are action, layout, and extra action. In the original video, extra action wasn't there yet, so just don't mind it. But the way the logic works is if the action is blank and the layout isn't, we want to just go to that layout. We have no reason to perform any actions, just go to the layout. But what if the action is not blank? And so that's where things get interesting. So we're going to do some sub-events. So the first sub-event that I have is start dialogue, which calls the DialogueManager. You don't have to worry about that for now. We'll get into this very shortly. But as of right now, if the action is blank and the layout isn't, we're going to that layout. So going back to, this screen again, if we click, it's running a click hotspot event, which is moving the player around to different areas of the house. But so that's like the recap. So, but like I said, what if we do want actions now? So the thing about actions is we need to introduce more into that function of the click event. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to this click hotspot, and if you still have 2 parameters, you're going to right click this and you're going to go to add parameter. It'll give you a box which will have a parameter name, a parameter type, and then default value. Go ahead and name your parameter to extra action, and then make it a string. It doesn't have to be defaulted to anything, but just make it a string, extra action string. Once you do that, the next thing you're going to need to do is go back to your input manager and go to their hotspot logic. So your left click event is running a function which is going to show the action, the layout, and then your extra action will probably just be a blank string like that, which is not good, because if we click a hotspot and then our extra action is set to nothing, that could break the game. So what we want to do is we want to set the extra action in here equal to the hotspot dot extra action. So as you can see here, I'm setting it equal to the hotspot dot to access the prop, the instance variables, and then extra action, which is the name of the instance variable that we're trying to access. So this is now set up exactly how we want it. So now that we've done that, we now need to go to our functions and we need to get this started. So what makes dialogue really interesting is that we sort of need a place to like grab and pull our dialogue from. And I've seen over the years, I've seen people do some interesting solutions. Like for example, there's no limit to the number of event sheets you can have in here. So if you want to create a very small, simple game, you could probably create an event sheet or even do it like somewhere and create dialogue as code like this. But the way that I like to do it is through external files. So and again, you can create dialogue systems there's different ways to do it, but the way I'm doing it is through external files. So the cool thing about Construct 3 is that you have a files folder right here. And with this files folder, you can create all kinds of files, including arrays, dictionaries, text, JavaScript, JSON, XML. There's just so much you can choose from. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create an array. You're probably wondering what an array is. Array is a collection of objects. That's basically, at its simplest form, what an array is. It is a collection of like string, or a collection of integers, or a collection of booleans, or it's just a collection of information. So when we create this array, you're going to go ahead and do new array, which will open up the construct array manager. So arrays are defaulted to a width of 1, a height of 1, and a depth of 1. If you experiment, by the way, you can go ahead and notice how the width is getting increased, the height's getting increased, and then the depth is not something we're going to worry about. Just keep the depth to 1, but the width and height is what we're going to be focusing on. So if we're going to be creating some dialogue for the player to say, what I think we should do, what we should start with doing is writing that down. So we're going to go to my examine bush array, and as you can see here, I have 2 lines of dialogue. I have the first is what you'll see is I have the first one here, and I just accidentally made my width. Okay, we have the first one here, and then we have the second one here. So I encourage you to do the same. So write some dialogue for that bush. You can copy and paste mine if you want, or you can type mine. You can also, make it as long as you want. And if you want to have new lines, I think if you press tab on your keyboard, okay, no, tab just, okay, no. So you have to, I think you just have to increase the height. So, but make sure you're doing it through the height and not through the width. You want to make sure the height of the array is getting larger. So I'll give you a moment to, or feel free to pause the video if you want to add some of your dialogue. Otherwise, I will continue. So now that we have the dialogue we want to say, the next thing you want to do is you want to go ahead and rename your file. In my personal opinion, make it relatable. So I did examine bush, examine pool. I'm gonna delete this because I don't need it right now. So we have, the two. Excuse me. We have the two dialogue files. The next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go back to our functions, and we want to create a new function called DialogueManager. So this function, as you can see here, isn't very long, but it's very, there's a lot to it. But all I want you to worry about right now is just creating the function. So to create a function, you right click and you go to add function, name the function, and then don't worry about any of this stuff. Just name the function DialogueManager. Once you name that function, we're going to add parameters to it. And to add parameters, you do right click, add parameter. And the parameters that I want you to add are dialogue script, all one word, which is a string, and then request or read, which is also a string. So now that you have the dialogue function created and the parameters created, we're not going to dive into the code just yet. We do have some initialization things that we need to do. The first thing that we need to do is we need to create a new event sheet. So up to this point, we have the functions event sheet, and then we have the input manager event sheet. But there's a new event sheet that I would like to add, and this new event sheet is an interesting one. It's called Data Manager, and what Data Manager is it's a place to keep all of our global variables. The reason why I keep all my global variables in one place is because it's convenient, it's easy. If I need to make a change to a global variable, I know exactly where I need to find it. So this is the place where I keep all my global variables. And then I also use the prefix glob. You can do whatever you want, but I prefer to use the prefix glob when I'm accessing global variables. That way I just know exactly from the prefix what I'm doing. So there are two global variables that I need for you to create. The first one is a global number. So to create a global variable, you right click and you do add global variable. And just to help remind you, a global variable is a variable that can be used anywhere in your project. It basically exists on the top highest level of the scope, and you can basically use your global variable anywhere. So make sure to declare your first global variable, and we're going to call it glob_dialog line number. We're going to declare a second one and call it glob_dialog script. Feel free to pause if you need some more time to create those variables, but those are the first two variables that we're going to create. So, and I'll explain why we're creating these variables. The first variable we're creating, glob dialog line number. This is important for looping through dialog. So if we have examine bush, you'll notice that there's two lines. There's line 0 and line 1. So we need a dialog line number to help us understand which line of the script we are currently reading. So that's why we need a dialog line number. Or in instances like this where we have 3 lines of dialogue, we need to know which dialog line number we're currently at. So that's the first. Don't mind my Super Spy Academy stuff. That's unrelated. But that's the first variable. The second variable is the dialog script. So how do we know the difference between, running examine bush versus examine pool? We don't know that difference. So we need to understand which one it is that we're pulling. So the string we're declaring is glob dialog script. So once you have those, the next system object we need to declare is the array dialog. So we have arrays down here, but what is important is we need another array to put our dialogue into, because right now these are just files. These are just external dialogue files that are sort of like on the outside, and what we need to do is we need to call them in and tell them, hey, I need you to get on set and say your lines. So like imagine these as like actors, and then this is the set. So in order to do that, what we need to do is and I don't know if you noticed, but I did organize more of my my project. Feel free to do this however you want to do it, but I did organize things into like system objects, user interface components, and so on and so forth. So to add a new array, you're going to right click and you're going to, why is it not letting me add objects? Okay, if it doesn't let you add objects this way, then I think you can just right click. Oh, maybe it's because I'm in the dialogue. Maybe I'm in the event sheet and that's why it's not working. Yeah. Okay, so if you happen to be in a situation where this doesn't let you add an object type, move over to a layout, and it'll let you do it. So right-click System Objects and go to Add New Object Type, and then you'll get the list of your object types. Go to the collections. I think it's collections, or maybe it's. Let me check real quick. It's data and storage, and there is the array right there. So what you want to do is you want to click Array, and then you want to name the array. To go in line with my project, please name it array_dialogue. I already created it, but make sure to name it array dialogue. The reason why I do it this way is because I like the prefixes. I think the prefixes are really important and it helps me know the difference between what I'm doing. So I do array_dialogue. And as you can see here, I have it declared there. So again, these are the actors that have their scripts memorized, and this is the set. This is like the where the actors are going to go. So now that we have all this set up, let's go back to our dialogue, and we are going to start getting into the nitty-gritty of like what this all means and how this all works. All right, well, before we get started with this function, there are some additional things that I haven't mentioned yet. So the first thing we want to talk about is the actual dialog box itself, because we can't really program anything if we can't see it. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about this dialog layer. So in the last video, I mentioned that when it comes to creating repeatable layers that can be used across any layout that we're in, we want to put them in a cookie cutter place called room 0. What room 0 is, again, is this sort of like a toy box, sandbox, safe space area where think of it like a train station or an airport. It's essentially a hub where all of our original layers are. And then when we create the layers here, we can declare them as global, like we did for the cursor layer. And then what ends up happening is we can send those layers off to other layouts, and then they can be called from other layouts, which is extremely important if you want to create reusable chunks of data or reusable chunks of code. There are downsides to using global layers. For example, if I wanted to do like custom stuff, then what I would have to do is not make it global. I would have to make it like a separate layer, and then call it differently. But what makes global layers nice is that if we have easy reusable code or reusable, physical aesthetic pieces that we want to keep the same, then this is really important. So to make things easier for ourselves, what I want to do is I want to remove the cursor layer, so make sure the cursor layer is not visible. And then I also want to, and then if you're using the project from the first video, then what I want you to do is make a new layer by right-clicking and then add insert layer above, or insert layer below if you're, if you want it, depending on where you want it. But just make sure your layer is below the cursor layer. And the reason why I say that is because if we have these layers visible and you have the cursor layer below the dialog layer, if the player moves their cursor into the dialog layer, the cursor becomes hidden. So definitely think of your layers like layers of a cake. If you have the cursor layer inside the cake, then the player won't see their cursor anymore. So make sure that you have your cursor layer being the upmost top layer of your game. And then when it comes to the dialog layer, we want that below. So declare that dialog layer, and then we're going to set it to global right here. The other thing we want to do is we want to make sure the dialogue layer is not visible and not interactive, because if the player doesn't have anything, or not the player, if the character in the game has nothing to say, then we don't want this layer to appear. We don't want this visible. So initially visible, initially interactive, no, uncheck both. And then when it comes to like this checkbox here, this is just the visibility for the editor, not for the game. So if you uncheck and check these, this is just showing it in the editor. That's all it's doing. So if we, once you get that going and set up, we do have some existing user interface components, and the first one is the black box. This black box is actually being used in the GUI layer for the cursor action text. So what I want you to do is I want you to drag the black box into your layer. And by the way, make sure you have the dialogue layer selected, because sometimes on accident what you could do is if you have the GUI layer selected, you might drag this black box in here, and then when you load your game, you'll be like, wait a minute, why is my sprite not showing? It's because you probably have it in the wrong layer. So make sure that you have your dialogue layer selected and then drag the sprite into your layout so that it's on that layer. And the way you know is if you go to the inspector here, you'll see that it says layer dialogue layer. You can also, instead of deleting it and re-adding it, you can also just change the layer here, but we're going to keep it. So what you're going to do now is you're going to drag the black box in here, and you're going to just size it however you want. Get creative with it. If you don't like the way I did it, if with the across the screen, you can change the box like this, and you can make it like this. Move the text around. You can do it however you'd like, but for this instance, we're going to keep it the way it is. The next object I want you to add to the dialogue layer is a dynamic text. Like we discussed in the last video, a dynamic text is a special text object where what it is that you declare a single dynamic text object, give it an ID, and you can use it anywhere in your project. So instead of having like 50, 100, 300 text objects that are just taking up space and not necessary, we can declare one text object, give it an ID, and then we can select those text objects anywhere in our code, and we can change those specific text objects. It helps reduce bloat, and it keeps the project clean and efficient. So what you want to do is you want to drag a dynamic text into your layout, and you want to give the name of the dynamic text, which I have it here already, so I'm just going to use this one. You're going to give the ID of it dialogue text, and make sure the ID of dialogue text is camel cased. So dialogue and then text. So just I'll wait for a moment. The next thing you're going to want to do after that is scroll down from this inspector window while you have the dynamic text selected, and change some of the font. So for example, you can make the font larger, you can make the font shorter, change the color to whatever you'd like it to be. Just make sure that you have the font set up, and then if you want to have it centered, you can. If you want it left justified, you can, but just make it nice and pretty, make it readable. The next dialogue layer object you're going to need to add is an additional dynamic text, and for this one, I didn't originally have an ID for it, but if you want to put a ID for it, you can call it like dialogue continue or something. But yeah, create another one and call it continue. And like I said, you don't have to put an ID for this one, but if you want to, you can, and just call it dialogue continue if you want, just to be consistent. So we have two text objects. So the dialogue text is going to be this text object is a dynamic text for the dialog box, because right now it just says dialog text, but what we're going to do eventually is we're going to select this text box and we're going to replace what's in here with the dialogue that the character is saying. But we're not going to do that just yet. The last thing I want you to add is a hotspot, and the hotspot you're going to add, put it by the continue button. If you want to make the hotspot really, really large and have it down at the bottom of the screen like this, you can. I made mine smaller because if the player maybe clicks here on it, like clicks somewhere over here on accident, and they didn't mean to do that, you can do it that way. But this is I just created it that way. The instance variables that you should set for this, if you want to get ahead of the curve, it's the cursor type of dialogue continue, which is, again, going back to my cursor right here, it's just the animation. And then if you go to the action, call it continue dialogue. This is just a event that runs that basically goes through the dialogue and just checks where you're at and tries to continue that dialogue. So make sure you have everything set up the way that I have it here. And then we will continue. So now that the dialogue layer is set up and everything is looking good, what we want to do is we want to go to our front layout. If you haven't done so already, right below the cursor layer and above the GUI layer, create that dialogue layer. So again, the cursor layer should be at the top of the project no matter what. The GUI layer, so what I like to do is I like to have the game object of our environment on layer 0, the hotspots on top of that, and then finally the GUI, and then the GUI layer above that. So that way, because the GUI layer always stays visible, I mean, we want that to be the case. But the dialogue layer should be somewhere in between the cursor layer and the GUI. And this is not like a standard, this is just how I do things. It's just for, organization, essentially. So what you want to do is you want to go to insert layer above, and then you want to type in the name of the global layer, so dialogue layer. So I already have it, it's already being used in my layout, but that's what you want to do. And then you'll know it's a global layer by the globe icon. Because if I spelled dialogue wrong, if I spelled layer wrong, you won't see that globe. But make sure that you type it correctly and that you set it up that way, sandwiched in between these. And then if you check it, you'll see that it exists. And just to recap, the room 0, this is where the original layer exists. And then because we called the global layer, it now is being pulled into here. And all of it is matching up. It's not initially visible, it's not initially interactive, you don't have to change any of those things. It just fits now. So if we go ahead and load it, you'll see that the dialogue layer is not visible. I do have to change some small things though, because there are some interactive situations that are happening here that I need to fix. But as you can see, it's so far so good. The next thing we want to do is we want to get into that function now of the dialogue. So originally I had you define the dialogue manager with the parameters. So I'm going to take this step by step, and if this is confusing at all, please feel free to write some comments to me on my YouTube. If you have questions, let me know. I will also release this so you can download it and test it on your own as well. But this is gonna be like a step-by-step of what's going on here. So the first line of code, so what we need to do at a very, very high level is we need to decide if we are requesting new dialogue or if we are going to be reading existing dialogue that's already been requested. And what that means is if this is a production, are we requesting an actor to come on stage and read dialogue, or are we going to use the existing actor that's already on stage? So in this instance, we're going to talk about the request. We have an actor behind the scenes, they are waiting, and they want to get ready, they want to come on stage, they want to read their dialogue. So the first line of code that you need to do is request or read set to request. So how does that work? So what you do is if you have a dialogue function, we're going to right click and you're going to do add blank sub event, and you're going to drag that blank sub event to inside the code here. You're then going to double click the condition area and you're going to do system compare variable, and then you're going to do the request or read string, and you're going to check if the request or read parameter is equal to request, like so. I'm going to delete this since I already have it here. So what happens when the director says, hey, I want to request, examine Bush actor to come on stage? What are we going to do? So remember the array dialog that we created here? So what we want to do is we want to, whatever was, let's say for example, we're in the middle of the movie and there was a previous actor on stage. We're going to have whatever the previous actor was, we want to reset that. We want to tell whatever the previous actor was, hey, get off stage. We don't need you anymore. So we're going to set that array dialog equal to 0, 0, 0. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our global variable that we declared in the data manager of glob dialog script, and we're going to set that equal to our parameter dialog script here. And the way you do that is if you go to system and you go to set value, you can go ahead and set the value of the our global dialog script equal to the dialog script that we're passing in. So again, just to recap, we are setting the global version of our dialog variable equal to the parameter. And the reason why we're doing this is because we're going to need this in different places. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set the line number to -1. The reason why I'm setting it to -1 is because arrays and construct are 0 based. So instead of starting with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they start with 0. So 0, 0 is considered this, 0, 1 is considered this. And when it comes to programming, it is important to know if a programming language is 0 based or 1 based, because if it's 1 based and things don't start at 0, then you need to know that ahead of time. So we're going to set our code to 0, 0. And we're going to go here and we're going to set our line number to -1. -1 is a holding place because we know that 0 is the first line of dialogue. So we're going to make -1 the the starting point where there hasn't been any dialogue yet. The director hasn't called action. It's just like the preview, like the behind the scenes, like where they're getting things ready. So now that we have like that first line, the next thing you're going to want to do is create another blank sub event inside here. And this is where we do where the director actually starts to call the actors to come in. So the dialogue script that we set originally here, which is being passed as a parameter, we want to check if that parameter of dialogue script, you want to check which one that's being called. So to do that, you go to compare variable, and then you select the dialogue script from the function, and we're going to check if it's equal to examine Bush. If it is examine Bush, and that's the actor we want, then what we're going to do is we're going to have the director call that in. So the way to do that is we need to create a system object, and we are going to, which I don't think I had you do this yet, but there is a system object you need to create called AJAX, AJAX. And if I remember correctly, I believe AJAX is asynchronous JavaScript and something. I should know, but I should know better as a programmer. Hold on, I'm bad with my acronyms. AJAX, and of course when you Google it, it's like it gives you like something completely different. So AJAX stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML, and it's a web development technology that allows you to send and receive data from a server without reloading an entire page. So that's what AJAX is. So what we're going to do is if the dialog script from our parameter is equal to examine Bush, then we're going to get the AJAX call, which is, I have it in my system objects. So you're going to do AJAX, you're going to do request project file, which is in our files folder. And then you're going to do a tag of dialog, which is, by the way, really important. And then select the file from the list, which is examine Bush. And then if you want, you can copy and paste this, and you can do the same thing for examine pool. If dialog script is examine pool, you do the same thing, request it. All right, so now that we, just double check if I'm recording. So now that we have that, I'm going to take a moment to exit this function for a moment and actually go back to our click hotspot event. So I don't know if this was added or if anybody added this yet, but what we need to do next is if you go to System and Action, I talked about this like earlier in the video. If we're going to just move to a different layout, then we're going to do this. But what we need to do now is we need to check if our action is not, if our action is filled in. So the way we do that is you go ahead and add, and then you right-click your click hotspot. You go to Add, and then you go to Add blank sub event. So make sure it's inside your function, and then but not what I just did. Okay, there we go. So it's inside our function, and what we want to do is we want to double-click the condition area. Go to System. Go to compare variable, and we want to set the action not equal to nothing. So what this means is our action filled in? Is it not equal to nothing, to a blank string? So I'm going to go ahead and delete mine. And what you want to do then is you want to create a sub event inside this condition. So, or you can do a blank sub event. Make sure it's inside, and then double click the conditional area, and then what we want to do is we want to check what that action could be. So we're going to go to System, we're going to go to compare variable, and we're going to go to Action, and we're going to check if the action is equal to start dialogue. We're also going to do continue dialogue as well if you want to get ahead, but just check if it's equal to start dialogue. If it is equal to start dialogue, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to call the dialogue function. So go to, so inside this, we're going to do add functions, and we're going to go to DialogueManager. So for the dialogue script, we're going to be passing in the hotspot's extra action. So, because think about this, if the player clicks a hotspot, we need to know like what we're calling from. Like we need to know, like the director needs to know which actor to pull. So we're gonna do don't forget, we're not adding this from the hotspot because we already have that information from the parameter here. So the dialogue script should be the extra action. And just as a reminder, this came from the hotspot. And I'll show you later. And then for request or read, since we're starting a dialogue for the first time, we're going to do request. And I just did that already right here. When it comes to the continue dialogue, however, this is different. This is where the actor, we already know who's acting, we already know who's on stage. So for this one, we're going to do the same thing as above, but instead we're going to pass in the dialogue script, which the reason why we're not doing extra action and we're doing the dialogue script is because this was already set in the DialogueManager, so we're just pulling what already exists, and then instead of requesting, we're going to have the actor read what they are currently reading. So make sure to make that distinction. Now we're going to go back down and we're going to go to the read area. But before we do that, actually, I do want to show you how the game looks so far. But I do need to do one thing, actually. So now that we have this request situation where, just to recap, we start the function, we have it set to request, we have the array being set to 0, we have, some initialization of variables, and then we have the requests being happened. And just a deeper dive into that. So we're onset of the game, the dialogue manager gets called. The director is requesting an actor that's, backstage to come on stage. We're going to take the existing stage of array dialogue and we're going to reset it. If there were any actors on stage now, they're no longer on stage. We took them, we told them, hey, go take a break. The dialogue script global variable we're setting equal to the parameter. So basically what we're doing is we are giving the production manager or the dialogue manager, if it was a person, we're giving them the new script. And then what we're doing is we're telling the dialogue manager or the production manager or whatever to start the script from the very first line, well, from -1, which is like this, like that would be the equivalent of like before you get a script, like before reading the first line of a script, you're maybe reading the title, or you're maybe reading like, or you're just holding it in your hands and you're not reading it yet. Like imagine just holding like a stapled like script in your hand. You haven't read it yet. You're just, looking at it, you're holding it. That's what we're doing here. And then down below, we have these sub events called dialog script. If it's equal to examine bush, then we want to request examine bush. So what we're doing here is if the parameter of dialog script is equal to examine bush, then we want to use an AJAX request to call that file. What does that mean in other terms? Basically, we're having someone from the production team go out backstage and say, hey, I need the actor of examine bush to come on stage, come and read their script. Or for the examine pool, it's the same thing. I need the actor for examine pool to come on stage and, to read their lines. So this is what's going on in the examine here. So there's something else that needs to happen once this request happens. And I don't have it in here for reasons of bugs, but if you go to the input manager, has some dialogue logic here. So we have the hotspot logic, but I also have some dialogue logic here. And what I recommend you do at first is just go ahead and create a group and then call it dialogue logic. And then once you do that, click add event to dialogue logic, and then go to system objects, AJAX, and go to on completed, and then type in dialogue uppercase. So the reason why I'm having you do this is because when you request a file with AJAX, this is something that might take some time to get done. And depending on like your internet connection, or like depending on like certain system speeds and everything, it might take a moment for the AJAX to actually like finish requesting that file. Like especially if your dialogue is hundreds of lines, it might actually take a moment for in milliseconds or whatever the case for it to finish. So what you need to do is you need to check if the AJAX request completed. And in like simpler terms, let's say for example we're on set and the production manager is like, hey, I need examine bush, and let's say examine bush was like hundreds of lines long. Let's say it was a really, really big, like, it was an actor that's memorizing a lot of lines. And let's say the examine bush actor is nervous. They're in the bathroom, they're freaking out, they're like, oh my god, I need to get ready for this movie, and I'm freaking out, I don't know if I know my lines, and I'm and the production manager is like, come on, we need you. So what happens in this situation is we need to know when the actor is on stage, because if the director maybe is having like a weird day, doesn't know if the actor is on stage yet, the director might actually prematurely start the scene, thinking that everything is fine. But in reality, things are not fine, and the actor is in the bathroom, and they're freaking out, and they're like having an existential crisis, whatever. But what we need to do is we need to have a moment. We need to have a event that happens. Is if the AJAX request, if production manager AJAX, gets that actor and tells them, hey, get out of the bathroom, you're ready for your scene. We need that to happen. So how does that happen? So we first do on dialogue completed, and dialogue, by the way, came from the dialogue function. So if we go to the request here, the AJAX request, you'll see that we're requesting the tag dialogue and then the file. So on dialogue completed, we're gonna grab our set, which is array dialogue. So in our system objects, we have array dialogue. This is our set. And then there's a method called load. So what load says is load an array previously encoded in JSON format. So we're going to do this, and we're going to do something called ajax.lastData. What this means is, and I'll go ahead and click. Make sure to write this, and then I'll explain it. So do ajax.lastData. So what this means, this is not a variable we declared. This is not something that was declared. This is built into construct. And what this means is, if we go back to our functions and we go back to this request. So, what's happening is, AJAX, our production manager, called this actor. When it's completed, AJAX, is, with them right now. AJAX has the actor next to them. They are, they're not fully on set. All AJAX really did was AJAX just has the actor with them. AJAX doesn't really have like the actor on set yet. What this is doing is telling AJAX, hey, take your actor and put them on set. So that's why that's what we're doing here. So the array dialog, we're loading from JSON string AJAX last data. We're telling the production manager to bring the actor to the set. And we can actually see this if we go to our layout, back to our front, and we go to debug layout. By the way, debugging will be your best friend, so make sure to get used to debugging frequently. So instead of preview layout, do debug layout. And what I need you to do now is go to your AJAX right here, and then click on the bush, and you'll see that the last data is right here, and it has the data inside it. So our actor is with us. And then we can also go to our array dialog, and you can see here that the array is also here as well. So we have the actor on the scene. So now we're going to go back to our function or our input manager, and we're going to, so now you can see that it's working. The next thing you want to do is you want to wait for previous actions to complete. The load from this to the array might take a moment, so just do a wait for previous actions. You can do that by going to system, and then at the very bottom, wait for previous actions. And then finally, what you want to do is call the DialogueManager. So go to your functions, go to DialogueManager, and then have the dialog script equal to our existing dialog script in memory, so glob dialog script, and then set the requester read to read. So now this is done, let's go to our functions, and we got the whole request piece done. So request is done. Now we're going to do read. So what does read mean? Read means we want our actor to start reading the script. So similar to this, we're going to do request. We're going to do a read this time. So go to add blank sub event, and then set your requester read variable to read. So if we're coming into our function and the requester read parameter is read, what we want to do is we want to add add the number 1 to our dialog line number. Originally it got declared as -1 because remember when -1 means we're holding the script, but now we're at 0. 0 means the first line of the script. If you go to examine bush, you can see that 0 is the actual first line of our code. It's the first line of our. So if we go back to our functions, we're going to add 1, and then we're going to do some internal line events here. So add a blank sub event for this stuff. And what we're doing is we're going to do some system layer code. So by default, the dialog layer is not visible. So we want to make it visible. So what we're going to do is we're going to run a system event called layer is visible. We're going to click next and then type in the dialog layer name, which is just dialog layer. But we're going to invert it because, this means if the dialog layer is visible, we don't want that. We want to do if it's not visible. If the if the scene of the movie is not visible yet, if the curtains are closed, we haven't even opened the curtains yet, open those curtains and display the dialog layer, which is what we're doing here. So if the dialog layer is not yet visible, then display the dialog layer and then set its interactiveness to true. What this means is that you can now see it, and the actor and the player can now interact with the components that are on the screen. The next thing we want to do is check if we've reached the end of the dialogue. So what we want to do here is something interesting. So with the system event, we can compare two values. So that's exactly what we're doing. And I could actually do this a little bit differently. I could actually clean this up a little bit. I could probably compare the variable and do glob dialog line number. I can actually do that instead. So instead of doing compare two values, just do compare variable, and then just do if the glob dialog line number, if it's greater than or equal to the height of the dialog. So for example, if we've reached the end of the script, if we are, at, if the line number is official, is at like, I guess if it's at 1 or 2, then we need to close it. So if we go to the function, what we're saying is, if we reach the end of the script, we need to make it invisible. So basically what this means is that this dialog line number that we keep, iterating, that we keep adding to, if we reach the height of the script, which, because as you can see here, the more lines we add, the height gets larger. So we need to check the height. If that gets really, if we've reached the end of the dialogue and there's no more dialogue left, then we need to make the dialogue layer invisible, and then we need to set the interactivity to false. And then what we need to do is we need to, so this is if we've reached the end. But if we haven't reached the end and we're still in the middle of our dialogue, we need to display it. So do, if you right click and you do add else, then we're gonna grab our dialogue text, and then we're gonna do a set, and we're gonna set the text equal to the name of our array, which is array dialog, @, which is a built-in function for arrays, open parentheses because it's a function, and then we're gonna do 0 because this is the width, and then we're gonna do the height, which is the glob dialog line number. So 0 is the width, which is the like the x coordinate, and then we're doing the y coordinate, which is here, which is that line number. So let's go ahead and I'll just stick for a moment, I'll just stay here for a moment, and then I'm going to go back to our code and we're going to test it. So as you can see here, this is line 0, this is line 1, this is line 2, which is nothing. I do want to check something really quick though while I'm currently here, and I just want to check if greater than accomplishes the same thing. Okay, it didn't. So greater than or equal is what we want. Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. So make sure it's greater than or equal to, and not greater than. Make sure it's actually greater than or equal to for that line number. So it should be, because we have 0, 1, and then 2, would be like the greater than or equal condition. So if we go back to the front again, we can test this. And as you can see, it's working. So this is an interesting situation. What's happening here is in construct, I'm not sure if this is a bug or not, but just because sometimes in construct there are situations where if a layer is invisible, is not visible or interactive, it's still for whatever reason trying to grab this. So there's a way to fix this, and the way to fix this, I haven't fully coded yet, but the way to fix this is if we're overlapping a hotspot and we want to change it to its cursor type. So what I'm thinking of doing is checking if the layer is interactive, that the hotspot is on, then set it that way. Well, in the next video, since this video is getting really, really long, I will fix these bugs in the next video. But if you do see that, you can feel free to write a comment to me of what you think you'll do to fix it. But I do think we can easily fix that. I think it's just a matter of checking if the object itself is in a layer that is currently visible on the screen. If it's currently interactive, then do it. And I think that's just something I need to fix. Which I'll address in the next video. But as you can see here, we have our dialogue and it's working. And for the pool, that is something I can fix now. So if we go here, examine pool, cursor type, we're going to do question. And we'll go ahead and run it. And as you can see, it's working exactly how we expected. thank you very much for coming in and watching me develop a dialogue system for Construct 3. I know that this probably isn't the easiest, and especially if you're coming from a background that's not programming, or if you're not used to the Construct 3 programming language or system, I guess, but just hang in there. I didn't really get a chance to say this, but when it comes to Construct, just experiment with the engine, have fun with it, and if you get overwhelmed, please take breaks. Sometimes when I'm coding in my game like Super Spy Academy, or even this, if I run into bugs or issues, sometimes just taking a break, like a nap, or sleeping on it, or going to get some food, eat some lunch, that honestly helps. So if you are, getting overwhelmed, just make sure to take a break here and there and stick with it. When it comes to coding a game, or learning how an engine works, it can be very daunting. It can be very, very overwhelming. But the nice thing about Construct is that the community is extremely great. I'm part of the Discord, at the official Construct Discord, and there's so many amazing people there that are willing to answer questions and help each other out. So make sure to give yourself an opportunity to go check that out as well. If you have questions for me on this video or on the functions, please let me know. I will also release these projects as well, or this current project iteration as well, so that you'll have the opportunity to download it and check it out. But if you do have questions, comments, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to my content so you can see future adventure game tutorials. This is just one tutorial of many more that will be available to teach people how to make their own adventure games. My goal when it comes to making these adventure game tutorials is I want to try to help people make games and learn coding along the way, but to not overwhelm people with too much of the jargon or too much of the heavy language. So I do want to try doing more analogies like the movie set. And, if that does help, please let me know. I would love to be able to, continue using analogies like that to help people. But overall, thank you so much for coming in today, and definitely stay tuned for part 3. This one was a really heavy one, so I will try to do something a little bit lighter for the third video. But this is adventure game creation. You are officially in the realm of adventure game worlds. And there are easier ways to do dialogue, but what I like about the way I'm doing it is that when you have your dialogue stored in files, when you have your dialogue stored in a place like a file, it makes things a little bit easier to change behind the scenes. Where for Super Spy Academy and some other games that I've done, I put the dialogue in event sheets, and I just had the dialogue, checking the line number in event sheets. But the problem with that is it can make your project super bloated, and it can make your project really it can just make your project really messy if you're not organizing it properly. Where if you can utilize, the files like AJAX calls and JSON files and stuff like that, if you can do that stuff now and you can get used to incorporating files like that in your code now, that will help you in the long run when it comes to parsing and manipulating chunks of data, especially when your dialogue gets to like hundreds of lines, or if you have like a visual novel. It really helps to learn what this means and how these files work. And regardless of what engine you're using, if it's, Unity, if it's Construct, if it's Godot, there will be situations where you might have to do some stuff like this. And I think what makes Construct such a great engine is that they do streamline it for you, and Construct really does a lot of the heavy lifting, which is really, really nice. But again, if you do have questions, if you do have comments, if you do have suggestions, please let me know. I'm eager to know what you think of this video. It's a pretty long one, but I will say, me creating this dialogue system from the ground up took me months. To learn it, to figure it out, to understand how this all works. It literally took me months. And here I am wrapping it up in an hour 15-minute video for the length of a movie. So it feels good to me to be able to condense this into something that I can teach others. But just know that, if you feel where I was back then, like when I was like a level 1 Construct, level developer, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes, thinking, and you got this. You can do it. When I was in college for computer science, my programming professor walked in, and this was my programming 101 course, and I remember he walked in, and he was a really enigmatic person, just a really interesting guy, and he was very like zen, if that makes any sense. Like, he was barefoot when he walked in. He would do handstands. Like, he was a really interesting person. But anyway, I remember on day one of his class, he said, if you aren't eating programming, sleeping programming, drinking programming, making love programming, showering programming, cooking programming, dreaming programming, then you're not a real programmer. And it was really jarring to hear that from him, because it made me realize that there's a distinction between people that program for passion and people that program just to do what they have to do. And neither of these cases are bad, but I think his main point there was, if you're going to go into this world, be it game development, be it programming for websites, programming applications, you need to really like dive in. You need to make it become your world. You need to do the research. You need to really just get in there and do it. And there's going to be times where you're going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be times where you're going to be experimenting with your engine, and you're going to be looking at your code and thinking, why isn't this working? So just hang in there. Programming is a lot of fun. And if you do have questions, just know you're not alone. There's a vast community out there, and there's a lot of people that can help, myself included. So hope this video helps, and see you in part 3.